places that are getting hammered by big storms, we're seeing more and more and more devastating downpour.
And there was one lynch tonight. Tonight, in the night of the conference, there was a lynch in Jerusalem.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City. On the internet at thestruggle.org, our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. 350.org has a division called Pacific Warriors. It's made up of people from low-lying Pacific islands who are on the front line of the growing climate catastrophe. Last summer, they came up with a campaign to send native boats to Newcastle, Australia, in a protest against coal mining there. This is a video they produced.
This October, we're standing up to those blocking action on climate change, including the fossil fuel industry. We've been building traditional canoes across the islands. Pacific climate warriors will journey to Australia, where they will use the canoes to peacefully lay down a challenge to the fossil fuel industry.
This project is the canoe project, that we stand up for the Pacific. But these are the youth that dedicate their time to come and continue the project.
This is a special trip dedicated to the Vanuatu warriors to travel to Australia for the big campaign against those factories that they're expanding from the coal mining industries.
We must act now to protect our culture, our land, and our oceans. And we need Australians and people all around the world to stand with us.
They did build these boats and went to Newcastle and blocked the port. Some people patronized the demonstration, saying it was cute. Others saw it as needlessly alarmist. And then this month, a Category 5 typhoon devastated the country of Vanuatu and wrecked almost all of its capital. Here is Bill McKibben of 350.org speaking at Democracy Now!
Last summer, in Vanuatu and 10 other the Pacific Warriors, 350's Pacific Warriors, built indigenous traditional canoes and took them off to Newcastle in Australia, the largest coal port in the world, and used them to blockade the great coal ships in an effort to demonstrate exactly what Cyclone Pam also demonstrated, the incredible vulnerability of so many of the poorest people in the world to the rising temperatures that we're inflicting on our one Earth.
Can you talk in a broader way about the threats that small island nations face? And then we're going to take this home, not to a small island nation, but to California, to talk about the issue not of too much water, but of too little.
Sure. Look, if you're low to the water on an island nation and the sea level starts going up, that makes everything that happens, every cyclone that comes, that much more dangerous. Even without a cyclone in the Pacific earlier this month, the huge king tides in Kiribati flooded many homes and villages. Add to that things like the ongoing heating and acidification of the ocean's waters and the concomitant erosion of coral reefs around the world. In many of these nations, coral reefs provide the best defense against a raging ocean, and that defense is breaking down everywhere. add to that the fact that we keep seeing these super typhoons, super cyclones. Warm air holds more water vapor than cold. It allows in arid areas for more evaporation and hence more drought. We'll talk about California in a second. But once that water's up in the air, it's going to come down someplace. And so we see from Boston, which just set yesterday the all-time record for snowfall, to places that are getting hammered by big storms, we're seeing more and more and more devastating downpour. This is a worldwide problem, but of course, places like Vanuatu are at the very sharpest end of the stick because they are so vulnerable.
Now to two interviews I did with Eran Efrati, a former sergeant in the Israeli army and now an investigative reporter. He had spoken the night before at the national membership meeting of Jewish Voice for Peace in Baltimore. One of the things you mentioned, and it was kind of surprising, was that Israel used depleted uranium.
Right.
When did they do that?
So during the Operation Gaza, it started in Sajaya neighborhood, one of the first fights of the Gaza massacre. Basically happened when the Golani Brigade went in and met a very hard resistance that killed 13 Golani soldiers at the first day that they went into Sajaya. It was the July 19. And immediately struck back with all the weapons they can. We're talking about from the sea, from the air, and from the ground, including tanks shooting shells. A lot of these shells are being built in with depleted uranium in them. This is coming out from testimonies from soldiers in the artillery forces, in the tanks units on the ground, telling me that the shells with the depleted uranium are already there. There's always shells with depleted uranium on the tanks, but they're not always using them. And this time they got an order to use them. So they're shooting a chemical weapon into very populated civil neighborhood with a lot of civilians still in it, killing in a matter of 6 or 7 hours more than 120 human beings in one night.
And you were there. You were there all last summer?
I was on the border, on the Israeli side. I was on the border waiting for soldiers to come out, taking their testimonies. I didn't believe mainstream media, like I'm sure you didn't. And I was waiting to see what's really going on there. And I saw the bombing from outside, but it wasn't until I heard the testimonies from the soldiers' mouth themselves that I believe that they did it again. It wasn't white phosphorus. This we managed to stop after 2009 with all the reports. But this time it was something new, not less harmful.
And I seem to remember that you were interrogated. Is that right? That you got under some problems there yourself?
I was. It started because I got a report out about how soldiers used the death of their friend as an excuse to revenge in Sajaya and to basically assassinate and target and killing civilians when they know there were civilians. They know it wasn't a harm for their life at the moment. And snipers shoot at civilians in Sajaya, like Salam Khalil Shamali, and other stories that happened that day in Sajaya. It's of course happened all over Gaza, in Khan Yunis and Huza, in Rafah, not only in Sajaya. But this target and killing got me to be interrogated for the first time this summer. And later on, the depleted uranium got me to another set of problems with Shin Bet in Israel.
But they did let you out, obviously. You're here.
They did. It's not a new thing. For the last 5 years, almost every summer, I'm getting harassed by these authorities and being arrested. This time, it wasn't that bad like I could expect it. I don't know what will happen. I'm going back to Israel and Palestine in June. And I don't know what will happen then.
Let's get back to last summer. You talked last night about mobs inside of Israel. What was that like?
That was probably the scariest thing in the operation that nobody is talking about, except for what happened obviously inside Gaza, happened around the West Bank, East Jerusalem, but inside Israeli cities. The fascism level in the cities, in the Israeli cities, is rise so much because you cannot really sustain an apartheid regime without it getting into the streets. And it did get into the street with the backup of politicians, with the backup of media channels in Israel. There were mobs of hundreds of people in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in the south, in the north. I was in Jerusalem at the time with my movement, with the friends from Anarchists Against the Wall, Boycott from Within, just looking around us and seeing mobs of hundreds of people going down the main streets of Jerusalem and calling out Palestinians that work for us in the west side of Jerusalem, coming from East Jerusalem, working for us in cleaning and cooking, calling them out of stores that they're working in and lynching them in the middle of the streets. Our movement tried to go around Palestinians and make sure that they can go back home safely. One of the things I did last summer was join one of these mobs, just infiltrating one of them, most of them looking like me, Arab Jews. It wasn't so suspicious, and just texting every time we got into an area to the rest of the guys of the movement to make sure there's no Palestinian in sight. And the things that I heard were crazy about Jews only loving Jews. Jews can only live with Jews. We need to basically kill. If there's a Palestinian guy hitting on one of our girls, we need to kill him. If there's a Palestinian guy raising his head too much in Jerusalem, we basically need to kill him. There were a few lynches down there in the summer that ended with a killing. There was another one of a bus driver after the summer in the fall. There was 2 new lynches now in Purim, in the holiday, a couple of weeks ago, and there was 1 lynch tonight. Tonight, in the night of the conference, there was a lynch in Jerusalem.
When you say a lynch here means killing.
So it was almost a killing. There's a Palestinian man right now in a hospital in a very harsh condition after being attacked by a few Israelis, some with sticks and one guy with a knife that stabbed him in the face. And right now he's fighting for his life.
Eran, tell us a bit about your background first, and then we'll get into this very strange thing called the Hannibal Procedure.
Okay, so I grew up in Jerusalem as a 7th-generation Jerusalemite. I grew up in a Zionist militaristic home. I grew up to go into the Israeli army. I was a sergeant in the Israeli army at some point, a first sergeant, before I left and started dealing with the occupation, the stuff that I did. I knew the Hannibal director as...
Hannibal, all right, so now let me ask the question.
Sure.
The Hannibal Directive, this is very strange. We've heard about it, that the Israeli army is so determined not to have any of its people captured that they will take any kind of risk, shoot, even risking their own soldiers, or maybe even shoot directly at their soldiers so they won't be captured. Is this real?
Right, so the Hannibal Director is definitely real, and I knew it since boot camp. When I was in boot camp, we learned about the Hannibal Director. We learned about how the worst thing that can happen to you personally is being kidnapped or being captured as a soldier, and you should do everything you can to not be captured, including killing yourself, or if your friend is being captured by enemy army or enemy resistance, you should shoot at the direction, even if it means to shoot your friend. This is how I knew Hannibal Director. But what we saw in August of last summer was much worse than that. The Hannibal Director grew and grew, and everybody inside the army and out agreed that the Hannibal Director that we saw last summer was the worst kind yet. So what happened is that in Rafah, in the first days of August, there was that debate if it was before or after a ceasefire. There were 3 Israeli soldiers marching ahead into a shack in Rafah when they saw a figure coming out behind the shack. The 3 of them went behind the shack to see what the figure is doing, and they were met with an ambush of Hamas resistant group that shot at them and managed to kill 2 of the soldiers. The soldiers managed to kill 1 of the 3 Hamas members, and 3 of them died, and 1 of the Israeli soldiers were captured by 2 other Hamas members into a tunnel in the area of Rafah, or the other side of Rafah. And what happened afterwards was very, very interesting. Soldiers from the IDF backup unit came into the area and basically found 3 Israeli soldiers dead, because all the Hamas members that were in the ground in the ambush were wearing IDF uniform on them that were left in previous operations in Gaza and in Rafah. And basically they saw 3 dead bodies with their face down to the ground in IDF uniform. It took 20 minutes or half an hour until they turned them around and actually found out that one of them is a Hamas member, and actually they're having a soldier missing. What happened then was incredible. In a matter of minutes, they decided to act on the Hannibal Director with no regards of human rights, just start bombing the area down from the air with Apache helicopters, with F-16 from the sea, from battleships, some of them for Germany and American battleships, and from the ground, from obviously weapons from soldiers, but also tanks with depleted uranium, again, artillery pieces, fire from everywhere. And basically, for something like 8-9 hours, killing more than 150 human beings and injuring very harshly hundreds of people on the ground. Now, among the people they managed to kill, they succeeded. The Hannibal director succeeded. They killed their own soldiers being kidnapped, and the two kidnappers in the tunnel found dead later on, or found parts of their dead body. Nobody really revealed their bodies, but they found parts of their dead bodies around in the tunnel, but also probably killed some of the other soldiers on the ground.
Some Israeli soldiers.
I managed to hear a piece of radio connection between two officers on the ground of the Givati unit under the command of Ofer Winter, the head of the Givati unit, that screams during the bombing, screams at each other on the radio, on the military radio, "Stop shooting, you're shooting each other, we're killing each other, stop shooting." And for 7 hours or 8 hours, they didn't stop shootings from everywhere. Basically, Israel is saying, we prefer to have dozens of Israeli IDF soldiers dead, but not to have deal with a captured soldiers that we need in a political way to negotiate his return.
I want to get into that because, what is the reason for it? I don't, I'm a student of history. I've not heard of any other army, even the Japanese Imperial Army. I mean, they said, don't get yourself captured, but I never heard of an army that shot its own people rather than they be captured. So what's the reason that the government or the IDF doesn't want soldiers captured so desperately? Right?
I think the matter of life in Gaza is obviously does not a matter of any interest to the Israeli government. But even we found out the life of soldiers themselves is not a critical thing in a bigger political thinking. Meaning when we're sending soldiers into Sajaiya in an armored vehicle M113 that we bought from the Americans in the late 60s, and basically we know that cannot protect them, we're saying we don't care if they're dead or not, we can dispose some soldiers. The more important thing is that we will conquer Sajaiya, we will conquer Gaza, and we will have our victory picture. A victory picture is a phrase that throws around a lot in Israel. What's really important, it's not how many people died, because obviously there will always be more Palestinians disposal for us Israelis in our frame of mind. And even if 100 soldiers will die, it will be something that we can bury for this picture of victory. But what we cannot have is Hamas members celebrating on the streets with a soldier in their hand with his ID or his military ID, saying that they won. We cannot stand it, and we're willing to kill our soldiers, but to have this victory in the end.
How do the soldiers feel? I mean, what does this do for morale that they know that they could be killed by their own officers, for instance?
So this is the most important, part for me, because we don't ask this question enough in Israel. Mothers are still sending their kids into battle, knowing that if they will be captured, they can return very safely, like in the story of Gilad Shalit, that returned safely to his home and is living his life right now.
Let's take a minute. Tell us who that was and where he was captured.
So Gilad Shalit was captured in 2006 on the border of Gaza, went into Gaza, captured into Gaza, and spent 5 years in the hold of Hamas before returning physically and seemingly mentally healthy into Israel in an exchange of prisoners. We sent more than 1,000 political Palestinian prisoners back to Gaza and different places in the West Bank, and we got Gilad Shalit, the soldier, back well and alive. Of course, a minute after he went back, we did an assassination killing in Gaza from the air of the man. Ahmed Jbari was the head of Hamas part, or Hamas group that was in charge of his kidnap. And after we make sure that he fulfill his part of the deal and bring back Gilad Shalit completely safe, we kill them, because we don't really respect the negotiation. We don't really respect the political game. All we understand in Israel is power. So we know that negotiation...
We being the leaders of the IDF and the government.
Yeah, precise. I'm putting myself in there. I was an Israeli. I was a soldier. I really do believe that right now, in this moment in history, we only understand power, or political power, pressure from outside, or physical power. And that's really saddened me. I have a family in the south. I have a family in Jerusalem. We're all somehow under some attack, not of course like the Palestinian, in last summer. But what I can see is that the only reaction I'm getting from them to the oppression of Palestinians is after they feel their life is also in danger and they're losing something as well. So after Gilad Shalit was back, we thought, okay, there's someone to talk to in Gaza. We managed to get a situation, a political situation, when we can talk with Hamas and negotiations are working. But the Israeli government is saying, no, we don't want to do that no more. We don't want to do negotiation no more. We're willing that you will be killed, but we don't want to talk with them anymore. And you know, the most interesting part, I think, what you said is what the soldiers themselves feeling. We cannot know exactly what all the soldiers are feeling, but we can say that after the last operation, the number of suicide has grown very rapidly. There's at least 5 stories that we know about that were published. It's something very rare because in Israel we do not publish the number of suicide in the IDF, but we know at least 5 soldiers that were in Rafah, in Huza, that killed themselves after the operation, probably not only discussed with what they did, but also understood what happened to them as well from the IDF.
Okay, my last question, hopefully will change the whole tone of the interview. You looked pretty happy last night. You were talking about terrible things, but you also were optimistic.
You know, this conference, this JVP meeting is unbelievable. There's 600 people from all over the country and Israel and Palestine coming together and saying, we're not waiting anymore. I tell you the truth, I'm not sure that when I came here, when I drove up here, I really believe that something really is going to come out of this weekend. But when I came into this room, I believe them. I believe that they're not waiting. They're not waiting for Israeli government and Israel to change from inside, obviously. I believe them that they're not waiting for their government, your government, the American government, to do anything to change the situation. But I do believe that they believe in their power. Finally, here on the ground, hundreds of people from around the countries, African Americans, Hispanic, Jewish, Christians, Muslims coming together and saying we can work together against this oppression, we can resist them globally together. And that was an inspirational moment for me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm very happy, and I do believe that we're closer than ever to the pressure that will break the oppression in Palestine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Much more about the JVP meeting in future programs. Efrati is correct in his enthusiasm. Something has changed in the U.S. Jewish community. A significant section is highly critical of Israeli leaders, and many oppose the entire Zionist project. The video newsman and media critic Danny Schechter has died. He played a great role in reporting on the fight against South African apartheid. I interviewed him in 2011 at Occupy Wall Street at Zuccotti Park in Manhattan. We talked about his film and book, Plunder, The Crime of Our Time.
I'm Danny Schechter, the news dissector. I've been working on this Wall Street issue, financial issue, since 2005. I did the film In Debt We Trust, which warned of the meltdown. Then I was called an alarmist, a doom and gloomer. I didn't know what I was talking about. Then the markets melted down. Suddenly, I went from being a zero to a hero. Now, I then continued to investigate, and I've done a film called Plunder, The Crime of Our Time, and a companion book to show how financial crimes is behind a lot of this. The narrative that most of us are familiar with is it's all greed. You know, everybody was doing it, therefore nobody's responsible. And I'm saying that's not the case. There was intentionality. These mortgage scams were done deliberately. They brought together 3 industries, insurance, finance, and real estate, working together to basically rip off all of these borrowers and to transfer a tremendous amount of wealth into their own pockets, because they not only got the money, but they leveraged it so that it was worth 10 times or 13 times more than what it was. And that's how we've gotten this 1% super rich gap between the people who are in a sense, in financial power in most of the American people who are, desperately trying to hang on, hold on, avoid too much debt, find a job, keep their house, and everything else that is part of what's going on right now. That's why I've been down here too, because this is really the first real pushback to this. I don't know why it's taken so long, but the fact that it's happening is great. And to think that after just 30 days, there were 1,000 cities in having protests. I don't know of any time in history that that's ever happened before. So it's exciting. It's evolving. We're not sure where it's going, but we think it's going in a good place. And what's interesting is a recent poll show New Yorkers by a 3-to-1 margin are supporting it. People are preferring this to the Tea Party in various national polls. It's touching a nerve, and I think that's important because people realize, it's taken them a while to realize that their wealth has been really stolen from them.
Now, speaking of crime, when the savings and loan went under, there was a lot of prosecutions, but there hasn't been much or any this time around.
I actually did the first network primetime piece on the SNL crisis for ABC News. And that followed, 1,700 banksters, as we call them, went to jail after that. So far, no one has gone to jail here. That's partly because they've decriminalized their, operations. The laws are really structured to protect investors, not the public, not workers, not homeowners. As a consequence, we've seen no real prosecutions. Also, so many of the politicians are bought by this industry. So there's so much corruption, and that's one of the reasons why there's no justice. That's why a movement like this is really important, but also to keep its focus, to keep its eyes on the prize, not to get off onto every single other issue. Because when they do that, it's going to fragment. And its strength right now is its unity.
And did you say you have a companion film to the book?
I have a companion book to the film, or a companion film to the book, either way. But it's called Plunder, the Crime of Our Time. You can go to our website, plunderthecrimeofourtime.com.
And outside of Bernie Madoff, who stole from the rich, I can't think of any of the banksters who caused the financial meltdown and the huge transfer of wealth from working people to the 1%. I can't think of any of them that the Justice Department has put in prison. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.